Royals and nobles who died in shipwrecks, and some who survived. Thank you to the History Channel for sponsoring this video. For as long as humans have been attempting to rule the waves, there have been voyagers lost to the mysterious fathoms below. And while Prince Eric was rescued by the Little Mermaid, not all royals who sailed the seven seas have been so lucky. Let's swim down to the VIP section of Davy Jones' locker and meet royals and nobles who lost their lives in shipwrecks. And just to keep you on the edge of the plank, I've included a few who were involved in tragic shipwrecks, but made it out alive. So trim the sails, hoist the colors high, and set a course for the past, where we'll meet 7 royals who died in or survived shipwrecks. Agrippina the Younger, Roman Empress, was born in the year 15. She was the great-granddaughter of the first Roman emperor, Augustus, the grand-niece of the second emperor, Tiberius, the sister of the third, Caligula, and wife of the fourth, Claudius. During her tenure as empress, Agrippina was the true power behind the throne. She was determined to make her own son, Nero, the next emperor, rather than her stepson, Britannicus. She convinced her aging husband to wed his stepson to his daughter, Claudia, and name him heir. Before the ink was dried on the adoption papers, Claudius was dead at 63. Might have been old age, might have been poison. Either way, Nero was emperor. At first, he was happy to let his mother run things, while he enjoyed feasts, sex, and playing music. But he fell in love with Poppaea Sabina and wanted to divorce his royal wife and marry her instead. His mother scolded him and forbid it, but his girlfriend called him a mama's boy, so Nero decided that mommy needed to die. Agrippina had seen and been involved in a number of assassinations, so she was wary of daggers and poison. Nero needed to get creative. He ordered the construction of a new ship, exquisitely decorated and luxuriously furnished. Then he sent a friendly invitation to his mama to vacation with him at the Palace of Bulli on the Italian coast. Who could refuse? He also offered his gorgeous new boat to get her there. The Dowager Empress and her companions boarded the ship and set sail. Little did she know that her diabolical son had designed a self-sinking boat. Once the vessel was in the middle of the bay, Nero's henchmen triggered the heavy lead ceiling of the cabin to collapse. It crushed one of the Empress's attendants to death. But Agrippina herself was protected under a couch. She managed to climb out of the crushed cabin, only to find the sailors, who had been paid off by her son, slamming their shoulders into the side of the ship to tip it over. They did manage to capsize the boat, but one thing Nero hadn't factored in was that his mother was an excellent swimmer. While she backstroked to shore, one of her attendants, either in a desperate attempt to save herself or to protect her mistress, called out, "I am Empress Agrippina, save me!" The crooked sailors beat the woman to death with their oars. Agrippina made it to shore, wounded and distraught. She now knew that her son, whom she had dedicated her life to, had tried to murder her. Heartbroken, she returned to her palace to await her fate. When Nero was informed of his mother's survival, he feared that she would reveal his treachery to Rome and turn the Senate against him, so he ordered his guards to race to her palace. When they arrived, Agrippina told them to smite my womb or stab her in the part of her body which had produced such an abominable son. They obliged, and Agrippina bled to death at the age of 43. She had survived the sea, but not her own progeny. According to legend and a number of graphic Renaissance paintings, Nero examined his mother's naked corpse and coldly commented on her beauty. He had her cremated on a dining couch and her ashes buried unceremoniously in an unmarked grave. But his mother's ghost followed him back to Rome. Without her sage advice, he was haunted by guilt and faded into madness, corruption, and debauchery. The famous story of Nero fiddling while Rome burned is apocryphal, but he did order a number of homes to be burned down to make way for his own golden palace. Romans turned on him, and the Senate condemned him to death. Nero fled the capital and ended his own life, sparking a crisis known as the Year of Four Emperors. William Ætheling, Crown Prince of England, was born in 1103 to King Henry I of England and Matilda of Scotland. His father was the son of William the Conqueror, and his mother was one of the few remaining Anglo-Saxon royals. Their children represented a union between the old and new rulers of England. Their only daughter, Matilda, was shipped off to marry Holy Roman Emperor Henry V. After the birth of a son and heir, the royal couple rarely slept together. Queen Matilda was far too pious, and Henry preferred sleeping with mistresses. He fathered several illegitimate children, but had only one legitimate heir, William. He was at least healthy and strong. One contemporary recorded that the prince was so pampered he seemed destined to be food for the fire. King Henry held his father's old land, Normandy, in northern France. As such, King Louis VI of France demanded that the English king pay him homage. But Henry absolutely refused to bend the knee to his rival, so he handed the title Duke of Normandy to his son William and let him do the groveling instead. In 1120, father and son took their good cop, bad cop routine to France and secured a peace treaty. On the journey home to England, the 17-year-old prince basked in the glow of his first diplomatic success. In the fishing village of Barfleur, he and his entourage of royal cousins, 2 illegitimate half-siblings, and several heirs to England's largest titles and estates, enjoyed a celebratory rager. A sailor approached the king and identified himself as Thomas Fitzstephen, the son of the man who had sailed William the Conqueror across the Channel in 1066. He offered to take His Majesty across the sea in the Blanche Nef, the White Ship, the newest and fastest vessel in the fleet. Henry had already commissioned a ship for himself, but he permitted Thomas to ferry the prince and his friends. Perhaps His Majesty wanted a little peace and quiet. After a night of heavy drinking, some of the young folks, including the prince's cousin, Stephen of Blois, opted to stay behind on land to nurse aching heads and stomachs. But William and others felt up to the sea voyage. They continued drinking as the crew loaded plenty of hair of the dog on board. Captain Fitzstephen asked William if he and his men could partake in some of their wine, and the prince heartily agreed, the more the merrier. Somehow, in the commotion, no one bothered to get a priest to come on board and bless the ship with holy water, as was traditional. Some later pointed to this as the cause of what happened next. By the time the White Ship left the harbor, it was night, and the passengers and crew were all 3 sheets to the wind. The experienced oarsmen were pushed out of the way by drunken revelers who made the ship fly across the water at an alarming speed. The hapless pilot steered at random, and courtiers egged on the captain, encouraging him to overtake the king's ship, which had left hours earlier. Just a mile offshore, the port side struck a rock, submerged just under the water during high tide. The mood switched instantly from joy to terror as the ship began to capsize. Some passengers and crew were swept out to sea. Others drowned as the craft sunk below the waves. Prince William's guards thought fast and got him into a dinghy. Lifeboats weren't a thing yet. As they rowed for land, William heard the terrified screams of his half-sister Matilda, drowning in the wreckage and begging him for help. William couldn't bear it, and he ordered his men to return to the wreckage. Once they got close to the dinghy, they were swamped by drowning men and women. The prince was pulled under the waves. When the captain, who was a strong swimmer, learned that the prince had perished, he let himself drown rather than face the wrath of the king. Only one man, Berthold, a French butcher, managed to cling to the mast, which remained just above the waves, as the rest of the ship was only in shallow coastal water. He was rescued by a fishing boat the next morning. Over 300 people perished in the White Ship disaster. Some of their bodies washed ashore. They had to be identified by their clothes, as their faces had been eaten by marine life, but most were never recovered. The ship itself was dragged to shore and its valuables recovered. When news of the tragedy reached England, King Henry collapsed in horror. Both his son and the future of his dynasty had been dragged beneath the waves. He quickly remarried in the hopes of producing another offspring. When his daughter Matilda was widowed, he called her home and forced nobles to swear loyalty to her. But England had never been ruled by a woman before, and many were against it. When Henry I died in 1135, his nephew, Stephen, of the life-saving diarrhea, managed to get his butt on the throne before Matilda. The war between the cousins, known as the Anarchy, lasted for 15 years and cost thousands of lives, all because of one fateful booze cruise. Magnus Erikson, King of Sweden and Norway, was born in 1316. His father was the son of King Magnus Ladulus of Sweden, and his mother was the daughter of King Håkon V of Norway. At the tender age of 3, Magnus inherited both of his grandfather's kingdoms, as well as their colonies, Iceland and Greenland. At 15, he was crowned king of both nations in Stockholm, which duly pissed off the Norwegians. He wed French noblewoman Blanche of Nemours, who tried to introduce luxury and sophistication to Scandinavia, with limited success. She gave birth to 5 children, including 2 sons, Erik and Håkon. Magnus modernized his kingdom by overhauling the justice system, outlawing slavery and domestic abuse, and giving women more rights. But these changes were not universally accepted. Saint Bridget slandered the king and queen extensively in her prophecies. Norway was salty about playing second fiddle to Sweden, so Magnus was forced to make a deal. When he died, Sweden would go to his eldest son Erik, as planned. But he would hand over Norway to his second son, Håkon, now, thus ending the uncomfortable alliance between the two kingdoms. Everyone was happy, except for Erik. He didn't want to wait to get his kingdom, so he rebelled against his father and took control of southern Sweden. Magnus needed help to defeat his son, so he arranged a marriage between Håkon and Margrethe, daughter of King Valdemar IV of Denmark. Valdemar invaded Sweden, but Prince Erik promptly died of the plague, and power shifted in Valdemar's favor. He saw no reason to hand Sweden back to Magnus, so he kept it and took over even more land. Now the two kings were posturing for war. Magnus cancelled the engagement between their children and instead betrothed his son to Elizabeth of Holstein. While she was on a ship sailing towards her wedding, a storm diverted her right to Denmark. With Lady Elizabeth in enemy hands, a Danish archbishop proclaimed the union a violation of church law because Håkon had already been engaged. So the marriage between 10-year-old Margrethe and 22-year-old Håkon had to go ahead. The next year, Swedish nobles deposed King Magnus and Prince Håkon and offered the throne to Magnus's nephew, Albert of Mecklenburg. The king and prince went to battle for their lost throne, but Magnus was captured and imprisoned in Germany for 6 years. Håkon eventually secured his father's release, and he returned to rule Norway jointly with his son, but he was a shadow of the man he had once been. In December 1374, the 58-year-old king borrowed a ship from an Icelandic bishop. He set sail from the capital, Bergen, to Tonsberg to celebrate Christmas and get a little peace and quiet. The ship hugged the coastline as it made its way to the other side of the peninsula when a storm rolled in from the North Atlantic and slammed the vessel into Bommerfjord. As the ship foundered, The king, in despair, flung himself into the frigid sea. His servants desperately dragged him back on board the drenched diagonal deck. With much effort, they were able to carry him to the safety of the shore. But by then, the king was already dead. 25 others drowned that day. Magnus's corpse was conducted to Oslo for burial. Though his rule was often interrupted, he held the record for the longest reign in Swedish history, 45 years. But it was broken in 2018 by King Carl XVI Gustav. Magnus's son, Håkon, exhausted from constant warfare, died 6 years later at the age of 40. His only son, Olaf, who had already inherited Denmark from his maternal grandfather, became king of Norway as well. But after he died suddenly at 16, his brilliant and charismatic mother, Margrethe, took power in both kingdoms and conquered Sweden. She became the first queen regnant in Scandinavian history and ruled over the Kalmar Union for 23 years. The history of the American West has fascinated me since I took a childhood road trip from Missouri to Oregon. So I was thrilled when the History Channel asked me to do this ad and sent me a sneak peek of their new series, Kevin Costner's The West. The History Channel has long been a premier destination for historical storytelling, and this new 8-part series tells the tale of American expansion like you've never seen before. It looks beyond what history books and Hollywood have always told us. Stories of displaced Native Americans, slavery, war, massacre, bravery, and hope are examined by historians and experts. Woven in with riveting reenactments, stunning cinematography, and the overarching narration of your guide, Hollywood legend Kevin Costner. See America like you've never seen it before with Kevin Costner's The West. New episodes Monday, 9/8 Central. Watch the next day on the History app. Part of History Honors 250, only on the History Channel. And now, back to history. Johan Willem Friso, Prince of Orange, was born in 1687. At 9, he inherited his father's title, Stadholder of Friesland and Groningen, 2 provinces in the Netherlands. His cousin, William III, Prince of Orange, who was stadholder of the other 5 provinces, became King of England, along with his wife, Mary II. But in 1702, he died childless. England went to his wife's sister, Anne, while the title of Prince of Orange went to 15-year-old Johan. William's 5 Dutch provinces should have been Johan's as well, but another cousin, King Friedrich I of Prussia, contested his claim. At 20, Johan joined the army and fought in the War of Spanish Succession. Although the conflict was primarily about who would rule Spain, the French Bourbons or the Austrian Habsburgs, many other European allies took sides and hoped to hash out their own disputes on the battlefield, including who should be stadholder of the provinces of the Netherlands. Johan fought valiantly, but when he was nearly killed by cannon fire, his mother decided he needed to produce an heir. He married Maria Louise of Hesse-Kassel, who promptly gave birth to a daughter, Amalia. Meanwhile, Johan was doing well in battle and was poised to take control of all the Netherlands. In July 1711, he left the front in Flanders and headed for The Hague. There he planned to meet with King Friedrich and settle the succession dispute once and for all. He might have traveled on to Leeuwarden to visit his wife, who was awaiting the birth of their second child. Johan never got there. While traveling across the country, he had to cross the Holland's Deep River. The prince, in his carriage, was driven aboard a ferry for the short journey. It was a stormy day, and strong winds and waves tossed the tiny boat. In the middle of the river, a great gale filled the sails, and the captain lost control. The ferry capsized under the crashing waves, and the royal carriage, horses, footmen, and the prince were all pulled under. Prince Johan's corpse was found floating in the river 8 days later. Maria Louise received the news of her husband's soggy demise shortly before delivering his son and heir, William IV. He became the Prince of Orange at the moment of his birth. Thus, Johan's dynasty was posthumously secured. Maria Louise served as a wise regent and attained her husband's legacy by getting all 7 provinces to accept their son as stadtholder. Until recently, Johan and Marie-Louise held the distinction of being the most recent common ancestors of all 10 existing European monarchs. However, with the 2022 death of Queen Elizabeth II, they were unseated by an even more recent royal couple. Check out my videos on both. Sunanda Kumariratana, Queen Consort of Siam, was born in 1860, the 50th child of King Rama IV of Siam, now Thailand. Her mother, Princess Piam, was one of the king's 35 wives. Sunanda and her siblings were educated by the real-life Anna Leonowens, so presumably she was one of the adorable children in the musical The King and I. When Sunanda was 17, she became the first wife and queen consort to her half-brother, Rama V. It had long been tradition for Siamese royals to intermarry to keep their power in the family. He promptly married 3 of his other sisters as well. Sunanda gave birth to a daughter, Kanabhorn. She was pregnant again when she and her 1-year-old daughter boarded the royal barge on their annual trip from the Grand Palace in Bangkok up the Chao Phraya River to the summer palace of Bang Pa In. The beautiful royal barge was covered in gold, colorful enamel, and ornately carved dragons' heads. But it was heavy and slow in the water and could only travel as fast as the oarsmen could row. However, in this modern era, the barge was being towed by a steam-powered royal yacht called the Pan Merut. The 2 tethered vessels were traveling through waterways teeming with commercial shipping, and the smaller, older boat was hard to see. A steamboat, the Sorawan, accidentally collided with the royal barge. As the ship capsized in flames, Queen Sunanda, who could not swim, struggled to save herself and her daughter. There is an often repeated myth that witnesses did not dare to help the queen, as touching a royal was a capital offense, punishable by death, and that they threw coconuts into the water, hoping she could use them as flotation devices. However, this is not true. Boatmen valiantly dove into the water, pulled the queen and princess from the entangling curtains, and dragged them onto another boat. But attempts to resuscitate them were in vain. King Rama was devastated by the loss of his favorite wife and daughter. He ordered a spectacular funeral. It took 10 months to plan the ceremony. Meanwhile, their bodies were placed in a golden urn and dried with injections of quicksilver. When it was finally time for the funeral, the king lit their 230-foot pyre at 6 p.m. It burned all night, and the ceremony ended with a mourning procession to the Grand Palace. The king had 8 more consorts and 143 concubines. He fathered 76 children, but he was deeply affected by the tragic loss of Sunanda. He instigated major reforms in his kingdom, introducing the policies and customs of Europeans who had colonized his neighbors. But through it all, he managed to keep Siam independent. Noelle Leslie, Countess of Rothus, was the only child of a wealthy London family. At 22, she married Norman Leslie, the 19th Earl of Rothus, scion of an ancient Scottish clan. The couple and their 2 sons, Malcolm and John, split their time between their mansion in Chelsea and their estate in Aberdeenshire. Noelle was renowned for her philanthropy and threw marvelous masked balls and garden parties to raise funds from her wealthy friends to help the less fortunate. She was especially interested in education, the Red Cross, and providing milk for poor children. In early 1912, Norman traveled to the U.S. and Canada for business. He telegraphed home to his wife, inviting her to join him. He wanted them to explore California together and perhaps purchase an orange grove. Noelle booked passage aboard the newest luxury liner in the White Star Line, the HMS Titanic. On board, she enjoyed the decadent lounges and sumptuous dining, check out my video on the Titanic's last meal, and hobnobbing with the rich and famous, though the Countess was the highest-ranked aristocrat on board. On the night of April 14th, she was asleep in her first-class stateroom with her cousin Gladys Cherry and their maid Roberta when they were awoken by a loud commotion at 11:40 p.m. They came up on deck to see what was going on, and the captain instructed them to return to their cabin and don their life vests. The Titanic had struck an iceberg, which ripped open 5 of her watertight compartments. Throughout the terrifying night, Noelle remained calm. The ladies followed directions and returned with their life vests to board lifeboat number 8. They were the first launched off the ship. The Countess led the other women aboard with decisiveness and optimism. She steered the boat through most of the night, resting only to comfort a young Spanish newlywed whose husband had been lost. In the morning, they were rescued by the Carpathia. Noelle dedicated herself to making sure women and children from 3rd class were fed and warm. She made baby clothes from old fabric, and the crew called her the plucky little Countess. Noelle became famous for her heroism during the tragedy, especially in contrast to fellow nobles Lady Lucy and Sir Cosmo Duff Gordon, Baronet, who made off in a lifeboat only 1/4 full and bribed a sailor not to go back for survivors. I guess they'd heard about what happened to Prince William Ætheling. Noelle did not welcome the publicity and praised the bravery of others, including the officer in charge of the lifeboat. She gave him a silver pocket watch, and he gifted her the brass number plate from their lifeboat. When World War I broke out, Noelle converted both Leslie House and her London residence into a hospital for wounded soldiers, where she worked as a nurse. Noelle continued her charity work until her death in 1956, age 77. Louis Mountbatten, Earl of Burma, was born in 1900 at Frogmore House, Windsor, to Queen Victoria's granddaughter, Princess Victoria of Hessen by Rhine. His father changed the family name from the German Battenberg to the English Mountbatten at the outbreak of World War I. His aunt was Tsarina Alexandra of Russia, and his sister Louise became Queen of Sweden. Royally well-connected young Louis embarked on a career in the Navy and served in World War I. In the roaring 20s, he was among the bright young things. He and his wife Edwina spent most of their marriage in other people's beds. Louis had affairs with both women and men. The couple had 2 daughters, Patricia and Pamela. His sister Alice married Prince Andrew of Greece and Denmark, but in 1922, the Greek royal family was exiled. Alice suffered mental illness and was institutionalized, so her youngest child, 7-year-old Philip, was sent to England to be raised by his grandmother. The young prince grew to see his uncle Louis as a surrogate father, especially as he rarely saw his own father. During World War II, Louis was appointed Supreme Allied Commander in Southeast Asia. He oversaw the recapture of Burma and Singapore from the Japanese and was created Earl of Burma. Louis continued to guide his nephew Philip's naval career and love life. He arranged a meeting with Princess Elizabeth, heir to the throne, and the pair hit it off. When they married in 1947, Louis was thrilled that the new royal dynasty would now bear his name of Mountbatten. But the royal family decided that they would stick with Windsor. Louis was appointed the last British Viceroy of India. He oversaw the partition of India and Pakistan and their transitions to independent states. He served as First Sea Lord and Chief of the Defense Staff and was the longest-serving head of the British Armed Forces. Louis kept close ties with the royal family and became a confidant to Prince Charles. On August 27, 1979, 79-year-old Louis was vacationing with his family at his summer home, Clossibon Castle, in the seaside village of Malagmore, Ireland. He, his daughter Pamela, and her 2 sons, Nicholas and Timothy, went out lobster potting on Louis's fishing boat, Shadow 5. When they were a few hundred yards offshore, IRA member Thomas McMahon detonated a 50-pound radioactivated bomb he had hidden on the vessel the night before. Louis's 14-year-old grandson, Nicholas, and a 15-year-old crew member, Paul, were killed by the blast. Everyone on board suffered serious injury. Louis was pulled out of the sea by fishermen. He was still alive, but his legs had been almost blown off. He died before reaching the shore. The Irish Republican Army, or IRA, claimed responsibility for his death in protest of British occupation of Northern Ireland. Bomber Thomas McMahon was convicted and served a 9-year sentence. Louis Mountbatten was buried in Romsey Abbey and eulogized by Charles, Prince of Wales. A special thank you goes to my patron, Stark Queen. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other history videos. You can also join my Patreon to support my work and get early access to all of my multi-part series. Thank you for watching.